Greg's lake access was suddenly threatened by the HOA, leaving him helpless over the dock he had spent years dreaming about. Karen Walters, the overbearing HOA president, tried to bully neighbors and bend the rules to satisfy her obsession with control. But when Greg uncovered his father's old documents proving full ownership, everything began to shift in his favor. And just wait until you see how this showdown ended and why justice ultimately prevailed. When I first saw the letter from the HOA, I froze. It wasn't one of those ordinary, forgettable letters stuffed between bills and junk mail. No, this one had a weight to it, a cold authority that made my chest tighten instantly. The envelope was thick, stamped with the HOA logo, and addressed to me in bold, almost formal letters. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the paper out. The words jumped off the page like a punch I hadn't seen coming. Greg, lake access will be revoked until ownership is clarified. I blinked. Then I blinked again. Surely I had misread it. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, there it was, plain as day. The lake, the place I had grown up admiring from my backyard, the place where I had spent countless summer mornings fishing, rowing, and watching the sunrise, was suddenly being threatened. My legal access, the very thing that was mine by right, was now being called into question by the HOA, by her, Karen Walters. The name alone made my stomach twist. Karen had always been the type to micromanage everything in the neighborhood. She was the kind of person who measured the length of garden hedges, counted the number of tiles on driveways, and made sure every mailbox met her exacting standards. Most people would have laughed off her little quirks as harmless, maybe even endearing, in a "she really cares about appearances" way. But I knew better. Karen had a tendency to cross lines when it suited her, and she loved the power she held over others. I never thought she would go this far, though. I never imagined that someone could take the law of my own property and twist it into a weapon against me. The words burned like acid in my mind. Lake access revoked. My dreams of quiet evenings on my dock, the smell of the water at sunset, the gentle lapping of waves against the pilings, all threatened by her unchecked ambition and obsession with control. My anger surged, raw and immediate. It wasn't just frustration. It was the kind of anger that makes your body tense, your jaw clench, and your mind race with thoughts of, "How could this happen?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm into the HOA office and demand answers, to confront Karen face to face and make her understand that I had a right to be on that dock. But I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm, even though every fiber of my being wanted to react in that instant. This was personal, yes, but it was also serious. If I let my emotions control me, it could backfire. I needed strategy, proof, and a plan to reclaim what was mine. Still, the anger lingered, simmering just beneath the surface. It was a potent mix of disbelief and indignation. How could someone so obsessed with rules and perfection forget basic fairness? How could someone think that threatening a neighbor, a lifelong homeowner, was acceptable behavior? Karen had crossed a line, and deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning of a battle I couldn't afford to lose. My heart pounded, my mind raced, and yet, amidst all the fury, a spark ignited. Determination. I wouldn't just accept this. I couldn't. This letter wasn't just paper. It was a challenge, a provocation, and it had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in years, a drive to defend what was mine, not with anger alone, but with clarity, evidence, and resolve. Karen might have thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what was coming. Days passed, and the weight of the situation began to press down on me like a storm cloud refusing to lift. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself that maybe this was just a temporary misunderstanding, that Karen Walters, with all her obsession over rules and appearances, would eventually calm down and let reason prevail. But that hope faded quickly. Her letters became longer, more insistent, and every call from her was a carefully scripted attempt to unsettle me. Each word felt like a push against my chest, a reminder that my peaceful access to the lake, the place that had always been a sanctuary, was now under attack. It wasn't just the letters. Karen began talking to our neighbors, whispering doubts about my dock, claiming that it was somehow illegal, that it had been constructed without proper approval. I could feel the subtle tension growing at community events, at casual waves over the fence. People I had known for years started glancing at me differently, as if I were under suspicion, as if my own dreams were now under judgment. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, not just by Karen, but by the very community I had trusted and loved. I realized that this wasn't merely about a dock or rules. It was about ego, control, and a hunger to dominate situations that didn't belong to her. Then, as if the constant pressure weren't enough, she brought in the HOA lawyer. I remember receiving the first email from him, formal and cold, filled with legal jargon that made my head spin. It wasn't threatening in a loud, dramatic way, but in the quiet, precise language of legality, it carried a heavy weight. Every sentence reminded me that this was escalating. What had started as an infuriating annoyance had become a persistent, draining fight that consumed my thoughts day and night. Exhaustion settled in. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I began waking in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of the letters and calls, wondering how I could defend myself. Sleepless hours became routine. I found myself staring at the dock from my window, imagining sunsets that might never come, imagining the gentle lapping of water beneath my feet, disappearing into a distant memory. How could someone's personal vendetta, rooted in pride and control, have the power to rob another person of something so deeply meaningful? I questioned humanity in those moments. Why were people willing to unsettle lives, to manipulate the truth, to bend reality for their own sense of superiority? Was it really just Karen's personality, or was it something bigger, an inability to accept that someone else might be happy, content, or simply exist without her interference? The realization stung sharply. Even so, amidst all the pain, there was a quiet resilience forming in me. I refused to let this defeat me completely. Yes, every letter and call brought a fresh wave of stress and sorrow, but I also felt a growing sense of determination. This wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about standing my ground, about proving that fairness and truth still mattered. I had to find a way through the fog of exhaustion, betrayal, and uncertainty, because letting Karen dictate my life or my access to the lake was simply not an option. The pain was heavy, but it was shaping something else inside me, resolve. And that resolve would soon need to be tested. Hope didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, almost unexpectedly, like the first light of dawn after a long, stormy night. I had spent sleepless hours pacing my living room, thinking about letters, calls, and the constant tension that had settled over every aspect of my life. The weight of Karen's actions had been relentless, and for days it felt as though every path forward was blocked. But then, while searching through a dusty box in the attic, I found it. My father's old documents, carefully preserved, papers I hadn't even remembered were there. I unfolded them slowly, my hands trembling slightly. Each page seemed to radiate reassurance. Property deeds, survey maps, and even handwritten notes from years ago all confirmed what I had always known in my heart. I legally owned that dock. Every detail was exact, every line of text a testament to my right to be there. The realization was overwhelming. Relief washed over me first, soft and tentative, like a gentle wave caressing the shore. But then came a surge of energy, a spark of determination. These weren't just papers, they were proof. Evidence that I could no longer be threatened or intimidated. I didn't waste a moment. I called a local lawyer, someone recommended by a neighbor who had handled HOA disputes before. Within hours, we began reviewing the documents, organizing everything meticulously. There was something almost therapeutic in the process, a sense that the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a real chance of regaining control, of pushing back against Karen's relentless attacks. The exhaustion and anxiety that had shadowed me were still there, but they were tempered by a growing confidence. Then came the first real sign of change. Karen, who had spent so long projecting absolute certainty and dominance, began to falter. I could see it during a phone call with the HOA. Her voice, once sharp and unwavering, now carried a hint of hesitation. The certainty that had fueled her campaign against me was cracking. She wasn't expecting me to be this prepared, to have documents that left no room for argument. And as her confidence wavered, so did her control over the narrative she had been spreading to neighbors. It was strange how hope could feel almost physical, a shift in the air, a sense that the tides were turning. The thought that I might actually restore my lake access, that the endless stress might soon give way to something approaching peace, was exhilarating. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to see this through to the end, not with anger alone, but with clarity, proof, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing you are in the right. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine stepping onto the dock again, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, the gentle lapping of water beneath my feet. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a goal within reach, and the knowledge that Karen could no longer control the outcome filled me with a quiet, steadfast hope. This fight was far from over, but now I knew I wasn't powerless. The scales were beginning to tip, and for the first time, I felt the exhilarating possibility of victory. Hope had arrived, steady and undeniable, and with it, a determination to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The next HOA meeting felt heavier than any I had attended before. The room buzzed with a mix of polite murmurs and tense glances. Karen Walters, as always, occupied the front, projecting an air of authority, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp. But there was a subtle change this time, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. I could sense it as I walked in, my own nerves tingling, a mixture of anticipation and calm focus. This was the moment where everything, the weeks of stress, sleepless nights, and relentless letters, would come to a head. I had rehearsed what I would say in my head countless times, but now, standing there, it all seemed simple. I pulled out the stack of documents, my father's deeds, surveys, and legal notes, and placed them carefully on the table. The room went silent. Even Karen's confident gaze faltered for just a moment, a subtle but telling crack in the armor she had worn so proudly for so long. My hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, carried the quiet assurance that comes from knowing you are in the right. I want to present proof of my ownership of the dock, I said, letting the words settle. These documents confirm my legal right to access the lake, and I believe they make clear that HOA restrictions on my property are without basis. For a brief moment, Karen opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came. The tension in the room shifted noticeably. Neighbors who had been cautiously listening now leaned forward, reading the documents, whispering to one another. I could feel the room's energy change. The absurdity of Karen's claims became undeniable. She had tried to control the narrative, but here was proof that left no room for interpretation. As the board deliberated, I felt a slow, steady wave of relief wash over me. Weeks of doubt, frustration, and sleepless nights began to lift. When the final decision was announced, it felt almost surreal. My lake access was fully restored, and the dock, my sanctuary, was officially recognized as mine. The applause from a few supportive neighbors was small but meaningful, a quiet acknowledgement that fairness had won. Later, standing on the dock itself, I took a deep breath, letting the warm breeze and the scent of water fill my senses. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I felt a wave of something deeper than relief, an inspiration, a reaffirmation that standing up for your rights matters. Even when obstacles seem insurmountable, even when it feels as though the world is aligned against you, perseverance and clarity can create change. I thought about Karen, still seated at the meeting, her composure shaken. While I didn't relish seeing anyone humbled, I knew that the lesson she had learned would resonate. Perhaps she would think twice before attempting to impose her will over neighbors again. More importantly, this experience reminded me, and perhaps anyone watching, that integrity and patience can triumph over intimidation. As I watched the water ripple gently beneath the fading sunlight, I realized something essential. Victory is more than a win. It is a reaffirmation of your values, a reminder that the truth and fairness matter, and that defending them is always worth the effort. This dock, this lake, this sunset, they weren't just symbols of property or leisure. They were symbols of resilience, courage, and the power of standing firm in the face of challenge. And in that quiet, golden moment, I felt truly inspired.